Hello, everybody. We're going to begin again in 1 or 2 minutes, so I invite you to come and take your seats, and we'll be ready for the second part of this excellent day. All right, you guys seem to follow that instruction really quickly. I appreciate that. You were very efficient in taking your seats. So I'll go ahead and kick off this first portion of the second half of the day by welcoming you to a first set of presentations on AI in forestry, from forest monitoring and restoration to wildfire prevention. So the very first presentation that we'll have is with Etienne Laliberté, who is an associate academic member here at Mila. The floor is yours.
Should I use this? This is fine. All right, thank you, and thank you very much, Anna, for allowing me to speak. So it's a real pleasure. And yes, I will be talking about forest monitoring trees with drones and AI. And I thought I'd just start by some visual, just to, it is a climate day, so we're going to talk a little bit about climate. This is an old but still relevant slideshow from NASA looking at CO2 emissions. So what you see in red is the concentration of CO2 that's being emitted. And one thing you can see, if you notice that the northern hemisphere, is that it starts red. That's actually before leaves of trees flush. And during the summer, obviously with the growing season, and you see a lot less CO2 being emitted, is just because the trees are taking quite a bit of it. And if you look at the tropics, there's a lot less CO2 that's emitted overall. Fewer cities perhaps, but there's also the tropical forest there that grows year round. So basically this is just to say that forests do have a play, they do have a role to play in regulating the global climate. And more we're talking about natural climate solutions. And of course what we need to do is reduce emissions. That's the first thing we need to do and the most important. But we can conserve forests, we can better manage forests, and we can also restore degraded forests. And that can play a role in sequestering carbon. But when you're studying forests, it's quite complicated because forests are vast. It's very hard to study them by traditional methods of going out there and walking to trees. And so it's really good to use alternative methods. And what we use in the lab is we use drones. So we fly drones over a forest and we get images that look a little bit like that. And the type of questions we ask are very general. For example, what type of trees do we find across the landscape? So in terms of species, what species? Where did they grow? For example, here you might see larch in the western part, and then you see sugar maple in the eastern, and white pine. This is all of our field station, University of Montreal field station in our north. We ask questions like why? Why do you see these species distributed across the landscapes? And questions like how? How much carbon do these trees store? How are individual trees responding to climate change? And so on. I just want to switch gear a little bit. I just got back 2 days ago from the central Amazon in Brazil, doing a lot of field work there, and tropical forests are really important. They only cover about 10% of the land mass, but they store 40% of the carbon in plants, and they also host about 2/3 of the world's tree species. People say there's about 65,000 tree species on Earth, and about 2/3, 40,000 or so are in the tropics. But if you've been to the tropics, it's very hot, it's very dense, lots of things can kill you, so it's really hard actually to walk around and study these forests. And people spend their entire lives counting trees, measuring lianas, and so on. And what we do is we bring new technology with drones that you can buy at the store. They're not really super expensive drones, and people, it takes a few days to learn how to fly them, and you can cover tens to hundreds and sometimes even thousands of hectares with some of the drones. And so what we do, and where does AI come into play? Well, we use this RGB imagery, and we do things, and this is work that was done by different people at Mila. Some of them are sitting in this room right now. So we do things like segmenting individual trees. You see all the white outlines of trees. And then we also know what is the elevation of each tree, so we can do things like sending the drone back to precise locations. And these are the red dots that we see in the images. And then we can actually program the drone to take really, really close-up photos by sending the drone 6 meters from the ground. And then we get images like this. This is actually part of the eggplant family for those of you who do some gardening, but this is an eggplant that's 30 meters tall that grows in Ecuador. And so from these images, the botanist can identify them, and then we can train model to do some species classification and so on. So why is this useful? Well, it's useful for many reasons. One of them is scientific discovery. For example, in the Amazon and tropical forests in general, there's no defined season like you have here. So it's not like all the leaves fall in the winter, right? And so there's a lot of variation within species, among species, of when do leaves flush. And it turns out that leaf age is actually the primary determinant of photosynthesis in tropical trees, and it's very poorly understood. So this technology can really help us to better understand how forests function. And this is an example of what that cool yellow tree looks like. You see the leaves are red, it's because they're actually young leaves. In tropical forests, you often see trees that have this delayed greening. They actually do that because they don't build the photosynthetic machinery before they defend their leaves, because if not, insects eat all of the leaves. We can answer questions as well related to tree mortality, because if you're able to segment and identify where the largest trees are, these trees, the 1% of the largest trees, store half of the carbon in these forests. And with climate change, we see that mortality of these large trees is increasing. They can be hundreds, sometimes 1,000 years old, and it's always a tragedy when these trees die, and it's really still poorly understood why they die from. And many of them actually die from lightning, as you can see here. So the ability to locate with AI over large areas at these trees to determine the cause of death is really important. Other technologies, it can be useful as well, this technology. I talked about forest restoration, and the student who actually did this study, Isabelle, is sitting in the front row there. So what we can do with drones as well is monitor forest restoration projects. These projects are often funded by the voluntary carbon market, but we really do care about, measuring the carbon stock in these trees. And drones are useful because, when the trees are small, you don't see them from satellite. You basically see very little. And so, with drone imagery, you can fly over one of these projects, you can detect individual trees, you can segment the crown of individual trees, we can estimate their height, so red is higher, and from all of this information, we can determine how much carbon is stored actually in these trees. And we do research on that, but we're also a Mila startup, a new company, and we're trying to offer this to people that develop these forest carbon projects so that they can apply and do the monitoring. So trying to translate the science to the real world. So just to conclude, drones and AI for forests can be really useful to accelerate forest science of individual trees. We can also use them to monitor forest restoration projects. What is cool about this technology is that it's now pretty mature, affordable, and cost efficient, but it does require more research, and that's what we're working on. For example, how do we segment individual trees through time to track temporal changes? This is quite difficult. How do we cluster trees into different species is also, especially in the tropics, a very challenging problem. So thank you very much.
I think we have time set aside for a few questions, so I welcome any questions from the room. I can come and hand you a mic, or you can come and stand up at either of these two microphones. We have one question over here, and then I'll invite you here.
Hi, Arnaud from Whale Seeker. We do the same thing, but with whales, and I would be curious to know whether you're already at the stage where you want to do it real time, so basically having the drone feed directly onto a computer on site, or whether you do the processing afterwards.
All right, so I think I missed part of it, but the question is if we do real-time detection on the drone itself.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Okay, good question.
Hey.
No, we don't, because maybe contrary to whales, like the trees don't move, so we don't really have a need for like real-time. But it could be useful, something we thought about, especially in tropical forests, is as we fly over an unknown landscape, it would be quite useful to be able to say, oh, this tree is interesting, I've never seen it before, to take one of these close-up photos, for example. But this is not something we do right now. All the processing is done after the acquisition.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
It looks like you're doing a lot of your work in tropical forest areas. I'm wondering, are you also doing some of this work in kind of Canadian, more boreal forest contexts, which are also important for carbon sequestration? And how does the kind of AI modeling translate from tropical forests to the more Canadian context?
Yeah, great question. So question is about boreal forests. So yes, we do work in temperate forests. So our university field station where we actually start a lot of that research is only an hour north of here. And we still do research here. I have a student sitting in second row who's been going there for 4 years almost every week to acquire image. So in some ways, yes, there could be, for example, the segmentation, the detection of trees is actually a model that another guy who's sitting there trained. And this model can work on both boreal and tropical forests. In the tropics, what's really different is the species. Is so much more. Like, for example, just in this small forest that I was working in last week, there's 500 tree species that we can see on the canopy in just this little patch of forest, whereas all of Quebec has 50 tree species. So the challenge of species classification is far greater there, which is interesting from an AI perspective.
Thank you. Next question.
Merci, Etienne. So it's clear that you can have high resolution from drone images, and you can get like a more accurate, the understanding of what's going on at this high resolution. Then my understanding is that you can, the advantages of like satellite images that you can cover like a lot of ground. So my question is about how useful it is to try to kind of match the two resolutions, and how hard it is to do that.
Yeah, great question. So I didn't talk about satellites because we don't do a whole lot in the lab. That's not because it's not important. So satellites is very complementary. The resolution tends to be coarser, but of course you can cover large areas. But what is really cool about the drone imagery is that it's super accurate in space, right? So it can be used as reference. So it can be used as training data as well for satellite imagery if you want to understand what's going on at the size of a country or so on. So the two are very complementary, but they're different. The nature of the data is the same, it's just really the resolution that's different.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Etienne.
Thank you.
For our next presentation, I'll welcome to the stage Melisande Teng, a PhD candidate here at Mila, who will present her work. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone. So my name is Melisande. I'm a final year PhD student here at Mila, and my work focuses on applications of AI for biodiversity monitoring. And in particular, I've been working in collaboration with Etienne on improving tree crown segmentation for plantation monitoring with drone imagery. So this is going to overlap a bit with some of the things that Etienne presented, but hopefully it's still interesting. So the motivation behind this project was that Canada has this 2 billion trees program, which is this program that aims at funding planting projects, and for various reasons, like planting trees can be a very efficient nature-based solution if implemented properly to capture carbon and hence biodiversity, which in turn can also support human well-being. Now, there have been a lot of critiques of nature-based solutions, and to only name a few, you can end up with contexts where people just plant a single species, and you will have monocultures that kind of destroy the habitat of the species that are already present there. There is often also a lack of involvement of indigenous peoples in the management of the plantations and decision-making of where those are actually happening, so land ends up being taken away from them. And finally, there is also, all this discussion around those fake carbon credits that end on the market, because if you don't have proper monitoring of the tree planting projects, then you can say, oh, I've planted 100,000 trees, but then no one is there to actually check that those have grown and not died. So to give a little bit of context, how do people estimate carbon in plantations? So normally what people do is that, you need three pieces of information to recover the carbon that is stored in a tree: the height of the tree, the diameter or breast height, and the species. And so you have to send people on the field to sample trees. So we've been with Isabelle, who's right here, to sample some trees in plantations. It's actually quite tedious work, and it's labor intensive and also cost intensive to send people out to monitor the plantation. So what people do in the plantations that we visited in Quebec is that every 10 years, people go out there, sample like a small fraction of the trees, and then extrapolate to the whole area of the plantation, and then maybe cut down like 30% of the carbon that is estimated because some trees might have died. So obviously, this is not does not give very accurate estimates of carbon. Now, the good thing is that, as Etienne mentioned, there have been a lot of improvements in drone imagery technology, and so now we're able to have very, very high resolution images with drones that are pretty cheap. And this is interesting because instead of using the diameter at breast height as a way to recover the carbon that is estimated, you can use the tree crown surface area of the image. Of the tree, and there's some nice tree image over here, and ultimately also recover the carbon that is stored there. And with drone imagery, you can also, if you have high enough resolution, get access to the species information as well. No.
Okay, let me just try. About that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'll try another outlet. That's okay. I think you can all imagine trees, but then what I was going to show is like a little bit more exciting than the screen. Oh. Okay, so around the time where we went on the field, to take some ground truth measurements, which was in 2023, there was this model called the Segment Anything model that came out that was developed by Meta. And basically what it claimed to be able to do is to be able to segment any object that is in a given image, provided that you give some prompts. Now you also have the possibility of just putting in your image, and then it will automatically create a grid of prompts and segment anything that is out there. And because it claimed that it was able to do this on any kind of imagery, zero shot, we thought, okay, then why not try to use this on the drone imagery from the plantations, and then we don't need to do any manual work. Okay, why is this not moving? Okay, so just to give a more graphic overview of Segment Anything, so the idea is that you have an image, it will be encoded to produce a kind of compressed representation of it, and then you have a mass decoder which produces a prediction of this segmentation mask of a given object given a prompt. So a prompt can be a point, so you click on the tree that you want to segment, or you give a box, or even some text label. Now, if you try this out of the box, what happens is that it does not work so well for segmenting trees, just because you don't give a specific, unless you give like a good manual prompt, which is also very time intensive if you have to do this over very large plantations. If you put it in the automatic mode, it won't segment the things that you want it to, as in you will have the background, sometimes you will have some bushes that are also segmented, but you actually care about trees. So we thought, okay, this doesn't really work well without appropriate prompts, and on top of the fact that we're interested in having good segmentation, we also care about the knowing the tree species. So we thought, okay, this Segment Anything model has been trained on so many images. There might be some ways that we can still leverage some of the knowledge that is has been learned by the model for our specific task. And so we came across this work called Iris Prompter, where the idea is quite interesting, where you don't need to have manual input prompts, but instead you will have this trainable module that will learn how to give good prompts to the mass decoder depending on your task. And so we tried that on our data set, and that seemed to work fairly well. But then we thought, okay, now how do we actually incorporate task-specific knowledge into it? And that's where we thought that using the digital surface model information, which gives you like this, well, it's quite explicit in the name, but this surface model of like the vertical structure of your plantation, like how do we incorporate that in the model? Because if it's quite straightforward to think that, oh, if you have the vertical structure of your image, then you would know where the trees are, but also it's easier to distinguish between like conifers or broadleaf trees. And so we ended up, incorporating this digital surface model information into the model as a kind of additional prompt to the mass decoder. I think I'm running out of time, so. What we found in this study is that, well, so this method that we developed actually, works really well for the particular plantation context in which we are. But that also led me to reflect a lot on, the use of foundation models versus smaller models, as in we compared, this adaptation of SAM and like different variants of it with a custom mask CNN, which is very, commonly used and smaller model that is trained, solely on the plantation data, and it does really, really well. So there's a, question to be asked about when are foundation models actually relevant. I think there's a lot of research that focuses on developing those models that work fairly well on many, many different tasks, but then when you look at a specific application, it never like really works so well until you need to adapt your model or either use a smaller custom model. And we also found that integrating domain-specific information through the digital surface model also helped. And right now what we're doing is extending this work to the context of forests in Quebec and in Panama, and it's completely different because you have so many more species, and you also have like closed canopies. So the vertical structure is like very different, and you might not get the same kind of information as in the plantations, but yeah, we're working on that. And as you can see, like this is an image from Panama, and it's very, very difficult to distinguish the different trees and the different species. Yeah, so thank you very much. This is work like done with a bunch of other people. Yeah, we'll have time to chat later.
Thank you, Melisande. Just as a caveat, we'll save the questions for after the panel section because we're very lucky and we will have the opportunity to hear Melisande again during the panel discussion. So for this talk and for our next talk with David Correia, we'll ask you to please keep your questions for the panel section right after. So without further ado, I will invite our next speaker up, David Correia, Senior Forest Specialist in Remote Sensing from Natural Resources Canada. The floor is yours.
It's on. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for being here. I'm David, and I'm a researcher at the Laurentian Forestry Center from the Canadian Forest Service, based in Quebec City. And I'll just take the next few minutes to essentially just give you a brief overview of the projects that we've been working on over the past few years. So since we're a federal research center, we're essentially focused on national level products, research projects. So we're essentially working with satellite data and not drone data. And we're also focused on distributing open data products that everybody can use. So there are two main research focuses. So the first is the disturbance detection. So a disturbance is essentially a wildfire, logging, and insect pests, anything that affects directly the forest. And the second one is the forest characterization. So essentially, what type of trees are there, what tree heights, those sorts of things. So one of the first major data products coming out of our lab quite a few years ago was the Canada Landsat Disturbance, or CanLAD, which is essentially the first data product that mapped all wildfires and harvesting all across Canada from 1985 onwards at a 30-meter resolution. So it was a really interesting product when it came out, and now we've tried to improve on it. So a couple of years ago, we decided to try and detect fire and logging up to 20 years before the beginning of our time series. So we're using Landsat, so it essentially begins in 1985 onwards, and we managed to actually try and detect some of the fire and logging before that actually started. So as you can see here in the light red, we have like the new fires we detected before, from before 85, and in light green, we have the harvest cut blocks that we've also detected from before 1985. So now we're actually moving forward from that, and we're focusing on insect pests, which are essentially the third major disturbance across Canada. And it's quite challenging to detect because we don't have just one cause, you have several different insect species that affect the forest in different ways. So as you can see in the light blue, we've managed to map all across Canada, again, from 1985 onwards all the way to 2024. And we're currently working on the publication. And for instance, we've managed to detect the spruce budworm outbreaks in Gaspé, and also the mountain pine beetle outbreaks in Jasper National Park all the way out west. And now we're also trying to focus on, let's say, the fourth major disturbance all across Canada, which is wind throw. So essentially when you have like a big storm, I don't know if you remember the derecho from 2022, it's like a massive storm that comes through, destroys a bunch of trees here and there. So you don't have like these big, massive wildfire perimeters, for instance, or clear harvest cut blocks. You have just some trees that fall here and here. So at a 30-meter resolution, it's quite hard to detect. So we're moving on to Sentinel-2, which is a European satellite that has a 10-meter resolution. And we've been using deep learning to detect those. And as you can see in purple, we've managed to detect them all. We're mapping them across Quebec for a single year. And we're eventually working on mapping them all across Canada from 2019 all the way to onwards, pretty much. So yeah, so that's let's say the disturbance part. With regards to the forest characterization, one of the major products we produced so far that came out a couple of years ago was the SCANFI. So that's the Specialized Canadian National Forest Inventory. So the National Forest Inventory essentially is like thousands of photo-interpreted high-resolution images like this one. And here you can, with a bunch of different forest attributes attributed to each polygon. So essentially, we pick that, and they're also like all across Canada, like in a regular grid. So it's a really good data set. So essentially, we pick that, and you just spatialize it all across. Well, again, from 1985 onwards. And so we've mapped so the land cover, 3 species attributes. So crown closure, which is essentially looking up, like looking at the bottom down look. You can see with the area that is occupied by the tree canopy. We have the tree height and the biomass, as well as the distribution of 10 species and species groups, from broadleaves to black spruce, jack pine, lodgepole pine, all those other things. So now this is a really interesting product, but there's something that's missing. So we essentially focus on the tree part, but what about the non-tree area? So this is like a drone image, and you can see that, let's say we have approximately 30% of the area is forested. Well, what about the other 70%? What's in there? Here we can see we have rock, we have lichen, we have some low vegetation as well. So we're essentially trying to map all of those different land cover classes, so from water, rock, and herbs, high vegetation. And we're going to attach that to SCANFI, to the main product as well. So now we'll know, okay, there's 30% forest, 20% lichen, 30% rock, that kind of thing. And again, we're going to do the whole time series from 1985 all the way to 2024. So the final product the project I'd like to quickly talk about because of the 2 billion trees project is that we're essentially trying to map the tree species productivity from which is measured as the site index. So it's essentially the expected tree height at 50 years of age. And we're doing that for 6 commercially important species. And we're going to do that from the current climate conditions and projected climate conditions from 2070 to 2100. So you might have been asking a bit of what's this all for? Well, how can you use these data products? So we really like working directly with some of our end users. And we know, for instance, that Scanfi is currently being used to monitor the forest carbon budget in the northern areas where there's no provincial information available. And it's also being used to model the existing fire behavior prediction field maps. So these maps are essentially, when an area is burning, you can simulate how that fire is going to spread and to know how you can fight it. So to do that, you need to know the current vegetation underneath. So that's where Scanfi comes in. And I've actually just found out this week that these maps are currently being used all across Canada. So there's like Manitoba Hydro that's using them to monitor, to estimate the wildfire risk for their infrastructure. Some private insurance companies are trying to get their hand, they're using that as well. And finally, we also know it's being used to model habitat stability. So there's this big project, it's called the Boreal Avian Modeling Project. So they're essentially modeling the habitat suitability for dozens of birds in the boreal forest. So yeah, I'll just like to take a couple of seconds to introduce the rest of the team that's here. So in the middle, you have Luc Guindon, everybody sitting over there if you want to talk with them. At the right here, it's Pauline Perbet. She's a PhD student at Université Laval, and she's the one working on the forest insect mapping project. And over there, we have Omid. He's another PhD student who's currently working on the wind throw detection project I mentioned. And yeah, we also have Philippe Villemer and Francis Manca, who couldn't make it here today, but they're a good part of the team as well. And yeah, all the data is available at the Open Government Data Portal. So if you have any questions, just feel free to write her or come and talk to us. So.
Thank you so much, David. Again, a reminder that you will get the chance to ask David all of your questions at the end of the panel, which I invite our panelists to come up now. We will have Etienne, Melisande, and David joining us again, in addition to Sophie Nitoslawski, Strategic Programs Director at TELUS, and Ceren Zeytinoglu Atici, co-founder of bnode. Welcome to the stage. The floor is yours. I'll hand you back this mic.
All right, so thank you for staying with us, Etienne, Melisande, and David, and thank you for your presentations. I think it's always really great to see how much can be summarized in such a short amount of time, looking at this type of complex work. And Sophie and Ceren, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. Maybe before we dive into the panel, we can start with some quick intros. So Sophie, I don't know if you'd like to start us off. I know that TELUS was actually ranked second most sustainable Canadian company last year, and we'd like to maybe anchor your work around that. So if you can talk a little bit about the work that you do at TELUS Environment Solutions and how it intersects maybe with some of the topics that were covered in the presentations.
Sure, happy to, and thank you for having me. Some of you might be wondering what the heck TELUS is doing here. It turns out that we are not just a cell phone and internet company. Recognizing kind of where the world is going, we're really starting to fashion ourselves as a data and technology company. And we've been engaging in a few kind of strategic AI partnerships more recently. In fact, we just engaged in a partnership with NVIDIA on an AI sovereignty factory or something like that in Quebec, actually, which is really interesting. And of course, we're a partner of Mila. And more broadly, we have kind of a long-standing history around social purpose. We actually put out our first corporate sustainability report, I think way back in the late 90s, which was actually quite advanced for the corporate sector. And beyond that, we have these kind of pillars that we anchor a lot of our work around data and technology around. So that includes health. We actually have kind of a health part of the organization. We have agriculture, and we also have the environment. And more recently, I work on a team that was just created a couple of years ago called TELUS Environmental Solutions. And we are a nature-based solutions arm. So we actually own and operate our own tree planting company. We've partnered with the 2 Billion Trees program to help accelerate some of our nature-based solutions work. And we are always very interested in understanding how we can integrate data, technology, including AI, in some of the work that we do, not just from an operational perspective, but also from a social impact perspective too. And I'm happy to get into the details on that. But that's why TELUS is here. And it's really great to be a part of this group. And I see a lot of potential synergies with what we do.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It does make sense. And there's a lot of complementarity on this panel. So excited to dive into it. And Ceren, can you tell us a little bit more about your role within the Global AI Alliance for Climate Action, and maybe specifically the Track and Change Species project, and how it relates to some of what the panelists presented already?
Hello, everyone. Global AI Alliance for Climate Action project is a project of Vector Institute and Bino, the organization I'm leading. Our intention with the alliance is to bring Canada's AI researchers together with climate experts worldwide for them to develop climate solutions together. We concentrate on 3 main areas: energy efficiency, preserving biodiversity, and extreme weather events. Preserving biodiversity one is especially very relevant to our panel today, and in that efforts, we're bringing Dr. Graham Taylor's team from University of Guelph together with the USA Phenology Network based in University of Arizona. Very interestingly, Phenology Network has a 19-year-long data set of 40 million data points about phenophases. Phenology, for people who are hearing the term for the first time, I heard it for the first time, when we started working with them, is the study of seasons, how seasons change, when seasons change, and when seasons change, how species change. So it's a very interesting field. And with that 19-year-old data set, Graham's team is looking at patterns and see which species are most valuable to observe for the greater context of climate change. It's a very interesting project, and I'm sure we'll dwell into it in the next questions.
Thank you so much. So maybe to start off, there's been a lot of talks about data, drone, satellite, and maybe some other complementary sources of data. David and Ceren, I see that you're working heavily with very, very long time series. Obviously, Melisande and Etienne, you talked about your work with mostly drone, and David focusing on satellite imagery. So maybe just to start off, can we talk a little bit about an overall overview of the benefits and challenges in using these data sources? And then maybe we can dive into how this is balanced, or how do we balance model complexity with computational efficiency? I don't know if David or Etienne, you want to take it away?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think whether to use drones or satellite depends on the type of project you want to work on. So since we're working, our team's focused on a national level project. It's it's okay. Okay. Is it on? Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Anyway, it depends on the type of project you want to work on. So with using drones, you can have really, really good imagery. Like I was jealous of the photos you were showing. But to upscale that to to a large area, it's much more challenging. Like we'd have to drive around Canada, and get multiple sets of drone images all across Canada. It's much, much harder to do that. So it's sort of a trade-off between the high resolution you can get and the satellite itself. That being said, we're not using drones themselves, but we started to work more and more with high-resolution imagery. So in forestry, photo interpretation is a bit of an art that a lot of people do. So all of the scan tree we developed is all mostly photo-interpreted data. And then we compared our results with actual ground measurements, and it held out pretty well. So it is a valid way of doing things in forestry, though it does have its limitations. So I don't know if you want to...
No, I think it's a great answer. Thank you. You also talked about model complexity. I can say, the models we use right now are not that, large. They're not that complex. The bottleneck is not so much managing the complexity of the data more than finding high-quality data sets to train and validate the models.
So Phenology Network is a very interesting data set because it's mostly gathered by what they call citizen scientists. So hikers, bikers who go around nature and just take pictures of different species and upload it to Phenology Network's database through their app. So it's very messy. It's very vast and it's beautiful, but there is no meaning in it because no one actually had a time or the resources to look into that 19-year-old data set. So that's kind of like the missing link that we're trying to bring into the picture. Graham's team, when they came together with Phenology Network, they had a look at the data set and they realized that it's very like scattered around there. Maybe like 5 pictures of the same species on the same month, for instance. But whereas, like, on the other hand, we would like citizen scientists to be more smart with their data collection, right? So now we're working on a prompt on that app that would give a kind of like a direction to citizen scientists saying that, if you're around this area and if you see this kind of, flower, it's in that phenophase. So if you see, for instance, when it's blooming, please take a picture and upload it to the app. So we're kind of trying to increase the efficiency of the relationship between the data collectors and data processors. It's obviously something not very conventional, but at the end of the day, we think it will prove to be very beneficial.
Okay, I'll just add something which is connected to what everybody has said. One thing that came to my mind is that actually one benefit of using drone imagery, besides the fact that it's really great to work in areas where you have in cloudy areas, because clouds are good for drone imagery, whereas it's like really bad for satellite when working with satellite imagery, is that I think there's a potential to really involve local communities more into like all the process of collecting the data to actually analyzing it. And so there's, like, I see a lot of potential of drones to actually be, it's not like we're going to equip everyone with a drone. I don't think that's like efficient. But I think there's potential to have like really a good empowerment of local communities to like conduct their own research work themselves through drones.
I think that's a really good point. I'm going to go off script here to maybe double tap on this and maybe discuss how you've all been engaging with local community. So we've talked a lot about the importance of relationship buildings and partnership. And there's still this type of urgency around finding solutions to climate change. So how do we mitigate maybe the time that's required for this relationship building and leveraging these local communities to be able to be involved from the get-go in these projects with acting fast and efficiently? Whoever wants to take the ball, I think this is a very interesting one to, and maybe Etienne, you want to talk about the work that you've been doing in Brazil and maybe how you've engaged on that front?
Sure, I can talk about it. So first of all, I just came back from Brazil. There's no way you can actually work in Brazil without involving local researchers, right? Just even to be foreign researchers, to work with local scientists, it's impossible to get a permit. You need to actually work directly with the people, and capacity building is always very, when you apply for the permit, you need to actually demonstrate what the capacity building in terms of training the local people you'll do. And so that can be done at that level for universities, but also government agencies, so we do that. And then working with local communities, it is perhaps a little more challenging, but very important, as Mélisande mentioned. And, we started to do some of that. And yes, it is true that it can be a great tool to show people what, remote sensing, how they can actually monitor the forest that they care about and where they live. And we've started to do a little bit of that, but it's still early days.
How was that received within the communities that you worked with?
Yeah, so for example, we worked in Ecuador. It was not necessarily a community, but it was members and specific members of the community, and it was received very well. So we spent a week there and trained them. We gave them a drone, and then they're flying it around. And they're actually, now that they see what it can do, because it takes a bit of time to sort of get familiar with the technology and see what it can do.
Now they're really interested in applying in other places in Ecuador and other indigenous forests that are owned by other communities to, get some critical forest intelligence of what species are actually out there, because at the end of the day, they live in these forests and they're also guardians of these forests as well.
So before we selected Phenology Network as a climate partner for Graham's team, we did the network visualization of the 1,400 climate NGOs working worldwide. There are 14, disclaimer, there's 1,400 climate NGOs in the world. And then out of these 1,400 NGOs, we realized that there's 70 of them, 70, has prior AI projects. So we intentionally reached out to those 70 climate NGOs who already worked with AI before, and we received 20 applications from them. And through that process, we were able to reach out to USA Phenology Network, which proved to be a great partner because they had the data set, they had the operational capabilities, and they had the trust of their local communities. So I guess one thing that I would like to highlight would be the intentionality and the research aspect of it. If you want to work with climate experts, it's really important that you know their work, you kind of did your research and realized pinpoint their focus areas and reached out to them with that intention and with that knowledge.
I might as well talk a bit about this about that. So at the Canadian Forest Service, we're actually trying to get to improve our. Okay. Yeah, at the Canadian Forest Service, we're trying to actually improve our connection with the indigenous communities, but it can be quite challenging. So, for instance, it took us over 3 years to staff a position for an indigenous liaison officer. So that's not, it's a 5-year project, and when it takes you 3.5 years to find someone, it can be quite limiting. But at the Larrivée Forestry Center, we do have essentially a work group that's based, whose focus is to reach out to indigenous communities and try to establish connections and research opportunities for project co-development between our researchers and the indigenous communities. So, for instance, via Exchange Canada, we have a researcher and a research assistant. We've been working at the Pessamit with the Pessamit community over the past 3 years. So they're working on capacity building over there, and I think it's going pretty well. So it takes a lot of time to develop these sorts of collaborations, but it can be quite worthwhile.
And kind of inherent to those projects, right? Sophie, if you'd be able to maybe speak a little bit about the Bogani First Nations project that you've been carrying out within TESI, that'd be great.
For sure, yeah. So I don't know if this totally answers your question, but one kind of a big approach that we like to take when we're developing some of our nature-based solutions is this idea of co-benefits, right? And so this idea that nature-based solutions provide a suite, essentially, of co-benefits across, the ecological and social and cultural spectrum. And so we have engaged with a First Nation in Southern Alberta called Bogani First Nation, and this was actually in partnership with the 2 Billion Trees program, which was great. And our approach was to really kind of try and listen and understand as to what the community is looking for from this particular project. In this case, this is a watershed restoration project and this really kind of interesting grasslands landscape in Southern Alberta. And as part of this co-development approach, we've been able to provide local training opportunities for community members. They've also been helping us kind of off-season collect seeds and actually do cuttings for projects into the future, because this is a long-standing project. And so kind of identifying these economic and social opportunities within this kind of ecological restoration framework, I think has been quite impactful and successful. And especially with partnership with the 2 Billion Trees program, we were also able to provide them for free with some early wildfire detection sensors, which we've installed around the site. This is kind of a drought-prone area, and so having this technology kind of freely available is also kind of providing some training opportunities and also just data collection opportunities to understand, the long-standing potential success, but also, risks involved, right, with restoration projects. So far it's good, and we're into our second planting season now.
Amazing. Thanks, Sophie, for sharing. And I think that the co-creation of these types of projects and initiatives is key in the work that you're all doing for it to be sustainable and live out through time. I'd be curious to maybe touch on the aspect of data sovereignty and open source, because it's something that came out quite a little bit this morning in the previous panels. And I think all of you have engaged with open source data sets, for example. And I'd like to know how you're managing potentially data acquisitions or trying to work with certain types of communities or groups or experts that may have access to data but cannot make it readily available. So maybe that tension between both and how you've been managing it. Duran, maybe if you want to start, it seems like it's been maybe a more positive experience without any too many hurdles on your front.
So I guess it's important to kind of highlight the role that Canada's AI ecosystem plays in being it's very easy for us. So when we first started the Global AI Alliance for Climate Action, the intention was to develop climate solutions that will be used and deployed worldwide, everywhere. We didn't have any intentions to serve to Canada or Europe or America specifically, so it was a very globally minded project. And Canada, after 2018, when Mila, Vector, and Amy was established, all these three organizations being non-for-profit organizations, so very impact-driven organizations, really helped with our project, because when we brought Vector together with climate NGOs in Switzerland, for instance, we kind of knew that both organizations proceed and work with the same mindset, which is how can we create impact with the technology in hand and the data sets in hand. So I guess we didn't have to hands-on navigate those questions, because people on the same table when we first started the project were already very open-minded about these solutions benefiting all communities worldwide. For our project, it was not that hard, but what was hard is how are you going to send all these data sets to a shared platform? How are you going to keep that? How are you going to build the model on it? So these are all questions that we're still figuring it out, because it's the pilot year. But I can say that if once you have researchers and experts with the same value systems and same mindsets when it comes to climate work, it's not that hard, because everyone just wants to create impact and get the technologies out.
Is this a shared feeling? I'd like to hear a little bit more from that. Everything's been easy breezy from a data, open source, data sovereignty perspective, because that's great. Tell us more.
Yeah, I can say a little bit more, because data sovereignty is a very important topic, and I just had to deal with it a few days ago discussing. So I think there's different elements of this. Sometimes people are worried about the control, who controls the data. Then there's also shared benefits. It's more okay, if we contribute data, how do we make sure that the benefit is shared and not just in the hands of the people that build the model or deploy the model? So there's different elements. For example, with the researchers in Brazil, it's very important. Legally, the data have to be controlled by the institutions on Brazilian servers, so that's, and then you need to, you need to put in place some data use agreements. So, and there's different types of data for the work that we do. There's, raw photos that people take, that's one thing. And then it can go all the way to a really world expert on particular group of plants that will label these plants, and there's only one person in the world that can do that type of stuff. So there's a whole gradient. Maybe one thing that I wanted to say is that we try very hard to integrate people in the data acquisition process, and local people, and actually give them jobs, well-paid jobs to acquire these photos. So that's one thing, because the capacity building is something that is very important in the process.
Yeah, well, from our end, it's been, we're using open data, pretty much Landsat. It's American. Trump hasn't heard of it, so it's still free. And we're using Sentinel-2. It's also free of access. And also our research is paid for by taxpayers' money. So we do focus on delivering open data projects that anyone can use. So it's not been a big issue for our research team, fortunately. I don't know if...
So maybe a follow-up question would be, if these data sets are open and readily available, does this mean that they're being used and they're being used by the right folks? And how are we able to track this, and how do we make sure, I know, David, you were mentioning something about contributing to the alignment of certain data sets to ensure that different regions across Canada would be able to use them, right? So Is there something more that we should do beyond just making these readily available? I know David this morning was talking a lot about some engineering support, going kind of just beyond. So I think the work in itself of providing open source data sets and publications is like an amazing first step, and also making those readily available to the user and the communities that you're working with. But beyond this, is there a little bit more that we could do to make these a bit more usable? Is there kind of a barrier there, in your opinion? And if there's no answer, Sophie, if you want to talk about the Data for Good program. It's in.
This doesn't totally answer your question because we don't work with a lot of open source data, so that's why this is maybe a bit of an aside, but we do have some data programs in-house that we kind of operate that we do make freely available to folks, especially researchers, and one of those is the Data for Good program, and this is actually mobility, so like smartphone data that's collected, and TELUS is very, very, very careful about how data is used and stored. We also have rules about storing that kind of data in Canada, for example, and in Canadian data centers. We are certified like privacy by design. I think we're one of the first companies to actually get that certification. But what's interesting about this data is that it can be used by researchers free of charge to help kind of enhance their research projects. And so people might not kind of be aware or understand the potential for smartphone data in the context of forestry, but interestingly enough, we have been working with a couple of researchers that are interested in looking at parks visitation. So this was in collaboration with Parks Canada, and they used some of our mobility data to understand how people are visiting parks, who is visiting from where, and there are lots of really interesting kind of equity considerations around that too, right? Like who is able to access high quality parks and green spaces? How far are they traveling? Where are they coming from? These are some really interesting research questions that can kind of really get at that ecological and social question of how people interact with forests. So that's a bit of an aside, but it's just a kind of highlight and a bit of a call to action in case anyone is interested in using smartphone data for that context or any other. This is an opportunity that is available to you.
Thank you, Sophie. And I think that this may lead us into asking some questions about the importance of partnerships and innovation ecosystems. It's something that was echoed quite a bit this morning. And I think we've assisted and we've gone to multiple conferences and panels in the last year, and it's something that keeps coming up, right? Leverage ecosystem partners. Do not work from your basement, as Jean Simon said this morning. It seems very simple, you know, at a high level, but I'd be curious to understand what are maybe some of the challenges that you may encounter in building these multi-stakeholder partnerships? And maybe what would you need to kind of like facilitate this relationship building? I think that I'm not wrong if I say that none of us really concretely knew each other very, very well, aside from maybe Melisande and Etienne before starting off this panel. So there's huge opportunities for complementarity here and collaborations. And we're bringing a whole bunch of different people together here in a room. So how do we capitalize on these opportunities? Is it time constraint? Is it the fact that it's not aligned with business goals? Is it what more could we do to maybe foster this type of stuff? Melisande, do you want to maybe take a crack at it? And maybe you could start, so I know that you've done a lot of work with bird species distribution. And how did that work kind of inspire the work that you're doing with Etienne? Because it was maybe developed in a completely different context. And how could that potentially transfer to other opportunities, right? With maybe industry partners or researchers. Is this something that you've seen or just kind of naturally happened in the work that you've been doing?
Well, I think as someone doing, research in a computer science, AI institute, but mostly computer science, I really wanted to work directly with biologists because I thought there might be like some more potential for impact, but also for, better understanding what is the actual need. Like I can think of 10,000 different projects and create, and say, oh, there's a need for X, Y, Z. And it's not even like, I can do this in good faith and really think that it's going to be useful. But then ultimately, if we're like developing, many, many models that are actually not usable by anyone or that don't answer a specific question that ecologists or biologists might have, I think the impact is like quite limited. So I think that's why I really wanted to work with Etienne. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, but there's always, the risk that you think you're working on an application that is, AI for sustainability and AI for good, and that's great, but then you end up having an impact that is more about maybe, inspiring one or two people in the machine learning community to work on these projects. But ultimately, I mean, that's great, then they might, have some impact and actually work on things that are actionable. But yeah, I think if you don't work with stakeholders who are actually interested in using what you're developing, or if you're not like developing something with a specific application in mind, then I don't know, it feels like sometimes application-driven research ends up being a bit useless.
Absolutely. So having domain experts, machine learning experts, and users at the table having this conversation. Anybody else?
So this crowd here is very high in literacy in AI for climate. So you can speak both the climate language and the AI language, but mostly when you bring climate experts together with AI researchers, they don't necessarily speak the same language. So I guess like having some mediators or translators in the room who will help these groups, help these multi-stakeholder cross partner groups speak the same language, align in the priorities, kind of have the enough face-to-face, in-person time to know the responsibilities is really important. Before kickstarting the Global AI Alliance for Climate Action, we had all the climate experts and AI researchers get together in a 2-day summit in Istanbul. And it came very handy because the first day was the workshop day and they had the whole day to discuss the priorities, what they want to achieve with these projects, what the roadmap looked like. So once they had that clarity, next 6 months was very easy because they knew what each partner had to do. But that workshop was a bit challenging because AI researchers were talking completely from a technical side, where our climate experts were trying to talk about the data sets, the impact, the stakeholders, everything. So I guess like having those people who have the patience and the knowledge to sit down with these groups and help them navigate these differences and just make sure that they're communicating in the right tone and level is really important.
Thank you. Are we moving on to the next question? And then this is going to be our final one. Maybe to wrap up, I'd like to touch on some of the ethical implications of using AI in forestry. So whether it be from a hardware perspective, having folks coming in for data collection, just a more holistic view, maybe beyond data sovereignty and data sharing, which we've already touched on. But maybe looking at, transparency in AI-driven forestry management practices, or beyond this, unintended consequences of AI in forest. Go ahead, Etienne.
Thank you. I'll be talking a little bit about some concerns from our partners in the tropics. I mean, for example, I was talking to my colleague and she specifically requested that for the data that will be collected as part of this research project, that the spatial location of the trees and their species is removed because some of these species are very high value and they could actually be illegally targeted for logging. So that's one concern. You always have to think that, okay, this tool could be used for something good, but it could also be used for something that you would not want. So that's clearly something to consider.
David, you want to go ahead?
I talk more about it's kind of. For us, we're mapping like Canada. It's a massive country, and nowadays it's relatively easy to just produce a map of whatever you want to map without properly validating what you're actually doing. So we actually try to properly validate what we're doing, try to be really robust, because it can have eventually can have some unintended consequences. For instance, since our fuel maps are currently being used by insurers to analyze fire risk, someone can lose insurance because of some error in our model that we didn't see. or that wasn't properly validated. So it can have some really important consequences that we try our best to to be careful and try to include other people. Other people look at our preliminary results to ensure that nothing's wrong, relatively speaking. We also have like a large metadata, like a user guide saying, be careful, don't do this, this, this. Most people don't read it and just do it anyway, so we try our best, but it's sometimes, yeah, it can be hard and yeah, quite challenging to do that.
Thanks, David. And I think Sophie had mentioned a really interesting case in the literature that you had come up with. Do you want to touch on that?
I did, yeah. I think this is an important case that kind of everyone working in this space should consider. I read a really interesting paper coming out of, I think it was Southeast Asia, where a bunch of technologies had been installed in some forests there for forest monitoring. And it turns out, you know, that these technologies were also being used as a tool for surveillance at the end of the day, which was an unintended consequence because a lot of these forests were being used by women who would go in, and I think that there was kind of foraging taking place, and also just kind of culturally, it was a gathering space. And a lot of these tools were actually being used by men in the community to monitor what these women were doing. So of course, that's a very kind of culturally specific example, and it's not to say that that will happen everywhere, but I think it's really important to think about forests as spaces that are not devoid of power dynamics, right? These are social ecological spaces. And I come from an urban forestry background, so we talk about this a lot in urban forestry, but I think it's easy to forget that when we are employing tools, whether they be AI, drones, ground-based sensors, we are employing them within a certain cultural, political, socioeconomic dynamic, right? And so it's important to consider how these tools might augment certain power dynamics that might already exist in these spaces. I think that's really, really important because there's always bias wherever you are, and these tools are not immune to that, and they're not agnostic. So I thought that was a really interesting case study that had never come across my desk before, and I think it's, even in the Canadian context, really important to consider, and we do that in some of the work that we do.
It's heavily contextual, and that's a very good use case for a trustworthy and responsible AI learning program, perhaps for the next cohort. So shameless plug here, but if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely worth doing so. Our teams are, you know, putting responsible AI at the core of everything that we're doing at Mila. It's very important from a research perspective, also from an industry perspective, so don't hesitate to reach out and chat with us about it. And maybe we'll wrap it up with just a quick roundtable of what would you like to leave our audience with today in terms of a call to action. We've unpacked a lot of stuff, but if there's one thing that you'd like them to come see you for or remember, what would it be?
Well, I guess if you're AI researchers or to be an AI researcher, just like a technical person wants to undertake climate work, but don't know how, maybe don't have access to those networks, those data sets, that local expertise, come see me and we'll see if we can connect you with climate experts some corner in the world.
Yeah, maybe take home message. Hard to say. I mean, this is kind of depressing in the news right now. And maybe I just wanted to say that, you know, the environmental crisis is still going on, so we should not stop talking about it and acting on it, even though there are other concerns at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. Can I steal that? And that's a pretty good take-home message. So I'm going to chicken out and go with that. And obviously, yeah, if you wanna, feel free to come and see us. If you wanna eventually collaborate, or just you're more intrigued about what we're working on, just feel free to come and talk to us.
Yeah, I think there's just like so much to do in this space, and I just hope that there's more people working on this topic.
I will say we have a lot of reforestation projects across Canada that we're working on, so if there are any researchers out there who are interested in maybe carrying out some of their work, we mainly operate in Western Canada, but who knows, we might expand. And so whether from a research perspective or technology innovation perspective, we're really looking to kind of integrate some test bed approaches into what we do. So let me know if that's of interest.
Thank you so much. So we're leaving a little bit of time for questions for our panelists. If anybody wants to come up, you're not getting away that easy. So if anybody wants to come up to the mic, or I can come to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. My question is for David. I would like to know how much do you validate the predictions you're doing And how do you do that on the field? Because it's a wide area you cover.
Yeah, exactly. So to actually, well, apart from doing the standard cross-validation, that's always way too optimistic. For ScanFi, we use the JEDI LiDAR dataset. So it's a satellite LiDAR that can help estimate the tree height. For instance, we use 2 sets of ground plots. So one in Quebec, it's around 2,000 plots, and the NFI ground plots, another 1,500 plots spread all over Canada. We use those 3. I think something else I'm missing. Like, okay.
Do you go on the field? Like, do you?
So the Quebec ground plots, we did not go in the field ourselves, but we have like other field technicians that went in the field and measured a lot of different attributes. Okay. So we measured those. Yes, and the NFI ground plots as well. So we have a lot of technicians that go on the field and measure those, but they're quite expensive to measure. It's approximately $5,000 per plot, so it's quite. Yeah, 1,000 plots, it's quite a lot.
So you don't use drones, or you don't use the help of Hydro-Quebec, or any other networks that could help?
What do you mean, the other networks?
By like Hydro-Quebec covers a lot of data in Canada, so maybe they could help you validating.
No, we didn't use that. We compared, just remember, we compared with other national level products as well to see if we have the same trend as well. Okay. So yeah, in the paper it's like 3 pages of validation with different sets. Okay. And we also talked a lot with the other end users to ensure that the results weren't just saying nonsense.
Okay. Now, do you know how much your data, your predictions are accurate, or?
It depends on the attributes. So ground closure, I'd say 75% are squared, something like that. Okay. Tree species obviously lower, like 30%. Depends on the ground plots and all that. Biomass was around 70% as well, I think.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's okay. And the one thing as well is that it's a single model, so all the attributes are correlated. So you won't have a model saying that there's a tree height of 20 meters, but there's 0 biomass. So everything is like harmonized.
Okay. And I guess it's always in progress, right?
Yeah.
You're doing all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, thank you first for your nice presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question for Melisande and Etienne. It ties a little bit to what you said, Melisande, about the impact and like having an impact on society. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how you operationalize your research findings in field, like you were talking about, like Brazil and I think Ecuador, if I understood correctly. And I think it probably ties with your startup. I think it's for the purpose of like operationalizing. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how this is actually going to be put in place, and what are the communities like how are they going to benefit from what you're doing? Thank you.
Right, great question. So we do care a lot about impact, and sometimes we would like to have more, but we do what we can. So the first one is impact on science and knowledge discovery. So this technology can be usually beneficial to researchers who want to understand forests, and so we do a lot there. In terms of the startup, it's new, we don't have any customers yet. Maybe we could, but the whole idea of starting it was just that this technology now exists and people kind of struggle to use it, because unless you have quite high level and know a lot of Python and so on, and it's not easy to use for someone who doesn't have that knowledge. And so the idea was just to package it in a format that can be used by people to monitor, for example, forest restoration project. So if anyone's interested, and the whole idea is just to make it accessible. Ideally, what we would want is that if we make the monitoring kind of accessible and cheap, then maybe that will help to provide more investment into these projects, maybe lead to more forests being restored, and so on. And I think that can only be a good thing.
I would just add that another impact that probably the only one I actually managed to do in my capacity as a student is actually bringing expertise and training to people outside the machine learning community. And so Etienne and I went to Yellowknife actually earlier this year, and we organized like a wonderful 2-day training workshop for people to get an introduction to drone imagery and machine learning, and not like saying, you absolutely have to use it. It was more, try to think about things that are important to you, and then we'll think together about whether drone imagery, using drones and like doing machine learning is actually suited for that. And even though, the capacity is not there yet, it just like helps, plant the seed in people's heads.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm one of Etienne's students. I really loved the panel. It was really cool. I was kind of curious, you were talking about like collaborating with people, and so I'm curious about like what does the workflow look like of like people, or like maybe an example of what the workflow looks like of like a community coming to you with a problem? Because sometimes I think a lot of the times researchers have ideas, and so it's like, I'm kind of like, do people email you? Are they coming in person? And how does that ball get rolling for each of you?
Ball doesn't really roll for us. We have to chase people. As I said, like we did a network visualization, so we identified the climate experts and NGOs that we would like to reach out to. So it was basically like emailing them once a week, trying to get a call in. But once we connected and had a chance to talk about what we're intending to do and what their needs are, I think it was easy, but we intentionally reached out to the climate experts and people that we want to collaborate with. So it was a lot of chasing. Yes, not rolling. But I guess that's like in all projects, you have to chase a bit, and you have to do your homework and really understand what they're doing. I think it always helps to go people with like some sort of understanding of their work. If you approach them and you say like, oh, I know you did this project and you already worked on this, so would you be interested in advancing your efforts with this thing? I think it always shows that you are trustworthy and your intentions are long-term rather than just like a quick research. So that definitely gets people excited to collaborate.
Since you know me, I'll pass the mic.
I think you should still answer for the crowd.
I'll go very quick though. I think most of it has been word of mouth. It's been like person that that recommends a person that talks to you, and it's rarely through cold email or like looking at a website. For me, it's always been like someone that referring to another person.
I'm gonna skip.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of everything, to be honest. And in case anyone does want to collaborate, just like find me on LinkedIn and I'll answer you, I promise. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's email and sometimes it's really just figuring out kind of what the common goals of the partnerships are. Working with the private sector can always be a little bit more challenging because often we're always looking for kind of like the value, right? Sometimes it's shareholder value, but sometimes it's also, social impact value. Sometimes there's even like branding value, right? Like this is just something that we need to think about. And so sometimes from a research perspective, it can be kind of hard to align on that. But it can happen in a lot of different ways. TELUS also actually has community boards across the country. So sometimes we tap into kind of local grassroots organizations to understand where there could be some collaboration opportunities there too. But my inbox is certainly open, so you can email me if you want.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful panel, everybody. And I'll invite the room to a short break. We have about 10-15 minutes, so I invite you to grab a new snack, refresh your coffee, have some water, and we'll be back here around 3:05. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started again soon. If you could slowly start to take your seats, we'll begin our next session in 2 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Hello, everybody. If we could please transition back to our seats now, we're going to begin our next session. Please, I want to be mindful of time. If you could wrap up your conversations and gradually move back into your seats, that would be very appreciated. Thank you so much.
Am I using this or this? Eh? Yeah, okay. Ça va? Ah oui, tu me poseras des questions difficiles.
For this next section, I have the pleasure of welcoming back David Rolnick, who gave the keynote address this morning, our core academic member here at Mila, with Maxim Larrivée, director of the Insectarium, to present their joint project on insect monitoring. I'll let them say more about that. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. I'm flattered and honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Obviously, this is a passion project, right? And this is a passion project for David, and things that you'll probably learn about him during this presentation. And I'm also curious of the format, because I don't think we've explored this format of a fireside conversation. But we have a few slides at the beginning, and maybe later also, that we wanted to use to introduce the project and the genesis of it, but also, the moment where I think we thought we had a good idea, and then how this led to what it has become now, and what were our mutual interests in that, and our non-mutual but beneficial interests to building this. So I guess the first slide is, well, you first know that there is a biodiversity crisis around the world. And this crisis is extremely, it seems exacerbated in the world of insects, especially because of their intimate relationship to climate and temperature and any elements of even weather, as we're learning more and more, to extreme weather events and things like this. And one of the problem and the challenges of understanding how to tackle this collapse and how to mediate it and how to find solutions is that insects are extremely, extremely diverse and abundant. They are so here in temperate forests, and they are so, and even more so in tropical environments. So arriving to standardized measurements of them using traditional monitoring approaches is nearly impossible. It can be done locally, and a lot of the interesting science that has demonstrated this collapse has been done over a long time series locally, but has never been done in a standardized fashion globally. And this is really where David and I's interest to bring up a solution to the insect monitoring crisis, but also understanding what are the driving factors and doing it at scale, came about when we started working together in 2020, 2019, or yes. All right, so some of you may not know, but David is a passionate entomologist, and not just passionate, he is an expert. Like among experts in his knowledge of entomology, of insect diversity. You will laugh and get uncomfortable, but humbly, he is extremely knowledgeable about this, and this is also where this intersection happens. I have a little bit of knowledge about building biodiversity databases and insect monitoring, and obviously I'm passionate about insects, but I had no understanding of machine learning and classifiers, so this is also where we came together in that regard. So this was one of my confessions about David that you may not have known. Is there anything you want to add at this point? No? I guess that says it all. But conventional monitoring, as you've seen, first of all, we can go back here, 2 slides, it's lethal, right? So you have to kill insects to document them, to count them and everything. And when you're in a biodiversity crisis for insects, it's a bit of a problem, right? It's probably the last thing you want to do unless it really helps contributing. And you'll find out why sometimes we still have to do so. So coming up with a non-lethal monitoring approach that could count, classify, identify insects by tracking them to a system and combining that with cutting-edge technology was for us a holy grail. And it is when we were building the new Insectarium and building, okay, it's still working, building the classifier that would help visitors photograph butterflies in the new Insectarium and be able to name this, because for us as museologists and entomologists, the biggest hurdle for people to build a relationship with insects is the capacity, and to anything in nature, is the capacity to put a name on it. So developing a classifier for the Insectarium was really important for us to foster, because our museum really focuses now on fostering a positive relationship with insects, which is a big challenge, considering that biophobia and entomophobia is the initial response of most people. So as we built this classifier and we learned together how this was working, David, through his childhood, and me for countless hours and years, had done monitoring of insects in this way, where we're at the light, we take photos of every single individual, then we have to upload them, then we have to identify them using all kinds of resources, and there are thousands on these sheets at night, even here in Montreal and in temperate forest. And we knew that there had to be a better solution. And that's when we came up with this idea of using a light that would attract the moths to a wall and to then have photographs of them taken that are fed through a machine learning pipeline. Right away, David said, well, this is a good idea, but we should see if someone else has had this idea, right? So we Googled it up, and a week before, someone had put a preprint about this exact idea on the internet. His name was Correia. Turns out I knew him because one of my good friends had done a postdoc with him, and we just connected with him. Hey, you had a great idea. And the problem with Correia, he's brilliant, and he always has your idea, but a year ahead of you. But the beauty about Toke is that he loves to collaborate. And he loves to work and bring solutions together. And our angle was that, well, we think that we can collaborate and bring in the work that we've done for classifiers into your workflow and put together something even better. And he said, sure, let's do it. So right away we started meetings with him, and then we had colleagues from the United Kingdom that joined in. And sure enough, we were a year later in the tropical forest, testing out Toke's systems and also testing out the classifiers and everything. And I think this is where I stop at this point.
If you want to put up like a slide or two, just so that we were going to transition to a free-form fireside chat here.
Yeah.
But just to give you some stuff to visualize, to see like what it looks like to do AI with insects, like that. And we have a video on one other slide, I think.
Yes. So imagine, so this is a frame like this is taken every 10 seconds. So that's 4,000 frames every night. In Panama, that was 500,000 images for 4 monitoring systems for 4 nights. I will probably identify 1 million or document 1 million insects in my life, and probably would have had to, end their lives to do so. And even then, 1 million's ambitious. This does it in less than a night and classifies them and counts them. So for us, it was unreal.
Fraction of the observations of insects are you personally responsible for in the province of Quebec?
Number of species or number of individuals?
Number of individuals.
What fraction?
Yeah.
Not that much, 5%.
So that gives you a sense of how many observations there are total. So if we're trying to actually document insects at any reasonable scale.
Yeah, so let's put this in context. I started monitoring moths in March. Most of you don't even know that moths are out in March. I finish in mid-November. I do this every year, and I've done this for the last 12 years. So that's also why I've monitored a lot of moths. I have a problem.
So Max is basically the original automated moth monitoring system, but less scalable than AI.
Yeah, exactly. A lot less scalable. So do you want to talk a little bit more about what we see on the slide there, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, over there on the right, we're not going to get into technical details, but this is an output from the algorithms that we built. Which is doing object detection, so it's putting boxes around insects. Then it's working out what the relevant, which of those objects are in the group of interest. And here we've been focusing on moths because that's actually a large fraction of what comes to a light at night. Max can tell you that 1 in 10 species is a moth. Like 1 in 10 species, including bacteria, including plants, including fungi. So like there are a lot of moths out there. So the just focusing on moths is itself giving you a really great measure of the local ecosystem, also like agriculture and forestry relevant species. But so then we classify which are moths, and then we get actual species. And so this is for some Quebec data. So anybody who's really up on your moths of Quebec, you can check to see whether those IDs are, I think they're all correct.
I can confirm it actually works pretty well.
But even in Quebec, there might be like 2,000 species, right? I think it's 2,000 species.
We're over 3,000 now.
3,000.
Yeah.
So it's a very fine-grained classification problem. And then we can also track them to count how many of a particular species are there. And this can all be done automatically with a solar-powered automated camera trap. So this is just gathering orders of magnitude more data and can be done like fully autonomously at at a place where you set up these systems. If you go to the next slide, you can see so I think a lot of people have touched on earlier in the day, it's not enough just to think about research. One also has to think about the engineering components. And so, oh, yeah, actually we can pass over this.
This is the one.
Yeah.
Do you want to start the video?
Yeah, sure. So this is just showing the software that we've built around all of this, because it's not enough just to have the algorithm by itself if people can't use it. And so this is a data management platform. It makes it possible for people who know nothing about AI to actually use these algorithms, whether you are a land manager or an ecology researcher. And so you can track the different occurrences of species. You can go through any particular observation, proofread them, see where the data is coming from, and get various kinds of ecological information out. So here you can just sort of see a workflow for how you might be going through this. I think that's all we have for visualizations. Do you want to come sit down? We can actually have a.
Yeah, and then we can come back and show. We can set it up after.
Yeah.
There's one thing to bear in mind about this platform, okay? So, when you think about projects like this, we think about complementarity. And we, at the Insectarium, build community science platforms where people upload one image at a time, and then experts come in and vet them. And the biggest conundrum that we had about Antenna was how were we going to build this platform? Because you guys are familiar with eBird, for example, iNaturalist, and some others. There's 3 of them in the world. And there's a reason why they're so complicated. We've built a platform called eButterfly for monitoring butterflies. And for me, building Antenna was a massive hurdle to making sure that all this data that we're collecting with the automated monitoring systems could be validated, stored, and made accessible. And the moment where this happened was when I realized that from the platforms we had built so far, we basically needed to replace the human that's entering the interface and submitting the information by an API that was connected to the ML pipeline. And when that happened, the solution was right in front of us. And that made a huge difference because we were able, with our web developers and ML experts, to develop this platform using pre-existing code and technology that had already been proven and tested. Otherwise, it would have taken, I think, an inordinate amount of time and trial and errors that we were able to escape because we were able to leverage some existing technology about it. I don't know why I'm plugging this now, but it made a big difference in this. And I gotta get out. Okay, so we'll leave it to this because that'll be the future, the end of the story.
Teaser. I'm curious, Max, what was unexpected or surprisingly hard about working with us computer scientists? I think a lot of people in the room are coming from a perspective of like, oh, there are these people in this other community and I might want to engage with them and they speak a different language, and it is sometimes challenging to find some middle ground. So what was that like from your side?
So you can tell that this is unscripted because I wasn't expecting this question. It's a really good one. What was hard? Well, I guess knowing what we were bringing that was going to be helpful to you guys. What part of our expertise in entomology could be beneficial to ML experts to make sure that, I guess, the raw material, the insect knowledge that we had, all those labeled images, how would that be beneficial, and that so that the collaboration would be mutually beneficial. So there wasn't you providing us a service because we needed that, and us also bringing something to the table that was at value. And I always remember my first meeting at Mila in 2019, and I was in a position where I needed help. And I walked out of the meeting and I went right away to André Philippe, which you know very well now. I said, this didn't work. We didn't position ourselves the right way. I said, can you please organize a new meeting with them next week? and we're going to come in and say, this is what we have. Because during that meeting, I also understood the kind of value that we could bring to, which was labeled, hundreds of thousands of labeled image of butterflies that were labeled by experts, right? Which can be used to test and validate and do things like this. And initially was having a sufficient understanding of how this relationship can be mutually beneficial. And when we did this, we came in with a different posture in the meeting. It was Sasha at the moment that was there. You were just arriving. And suddenly everyone around the table, we were fairly intimidated, by the way, because most ML folks are considered extremely smart. And but the dynamic changed. They started envisioning, right, you have all this information for us that can be beneficial. This is how we can start leveraging it. And gradually, as we understood more your language of ResNet, PyTorch, and also how the classifier worked, it helped me because I'd done a lot of species distribution modeling, so I understood most of the sometimes different language about epochs but testing samples and all that stuff. So this wasn't foreign to me, but it was really understanding that mutual part. Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like you have two groups coming in with different insecurities and feelings of what are we bringing to the table. On our side, you have the feeling of, well, I worked for 2 months on this thing. Here's the thing. Is anybody actually going to use it? Is it the right thing? Did we build completely the wrong thing? And so I think it's a complementary insecurity. And ideally one meets in the middle and realizes that both of the functions are extremely important and also both require a large amount of time investment, right? Like it's not just that ML people spend a lot of time coding and then the entomologists come in and say, okay, good or not good.
Do this for me. I think that's a really good point. And I think the other point is the notion of trust as well and understanding of this complementarity. Because for us as well, we need to know that when we're going to give feedback and also be open to feedback and reception in that regard. Because for us as well, if there are tweaks and improvements that need to be done, and I think that happens a lot in this type of developing environment in R&D, we need to be able to communicate this in a respectful way, secure way, and with confidence that we're also using the same terminology so that our issues are communicated and understood. And so building a common language and understanding this, and for, I call David a bit of a unicorn because I've worked with folks in machine learning, but also especially in web development and in biodiversity database management, where we literally do not speak the same language, right? The notion of hierarchical and nested diversity, orders of insects, classes, everything and how this diversity is structured and has been traditionally, that makes an enormous difference on how the code and the relational databases are going to be built. And with David, he spoke our language already, so that made an enormous difference into how we were able to move forward. And he could anticipate the challenges that the two fields would have in that regard. Do you feel that way?
I mean, I think that I'm closer to that side than I could be, but it also highlights how much need there is for people who are experts, like truly experts in entomology. Like it makes one realize how much one doesn't know and how much one needs the people who actually are doing this in the field. And I think that really does underscore the role of people who try to build bridges from one side. You're probably still going to be more on one side, and you're still going to work with people on the other side, but you're close enough that you can bridge the rest of the gap, I guess. You don't have to be literally in the middle in order to make a difference.
No, absolutely. I think, and this is something that's important to share as well. Like I was telling Anna earlier, everyone has good ideas. Very few people, once they have a good idea, will have the luxury in their mind of saying, okay, so what do we need now to make this good idea happen? Most people will go, but I don't have the resources, and I'm alone doing this, and I don't know who to talk to, and they're going to put it aside and not do it. And these intersectorial projects only happen because we developed the reflex of saying, okay, so who can help me? And then have the courage of saying, do you want to work with us on this? And
also have those resources. The privilege comes in as well.
No, I know in many ways as well, but that also enabling this capacity to dream that you can do it makes a big difference at all level. And then the other part is being able to think and who is complementary and how together are we going to be able to build this, and accept also that there's going to be like terminology barriers and things like this that make a big difference. I have a question for you. As the project unfolded, what often happens is that novel usage of this tool that we're building come to light. What was the one that was most innovative or that created a new puzzle or a potential solution that you hadn't anticipated?
Well, I think it's the thing that we have a spare slide up on. So maybe we can.
Oh.
Can we go back to it?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah. So I mean, this was the new opportunity that I got most excited. Surprised, excited by. I wasn't thinking about this at the start, though we totally both should have been. I guess maybe you were thinking about this earlier. No. So one of the challenges of machine learning models is that they need labeled data, generally speaking, and those labels can come from any number of things. They can even come from self-supervision with the data itself, as I was talking about in the morning. But fundamentally with species, there are a lot of moths that have very little labeled data. And some significant amount of that is because there are a lot of unknown moths and insects in general. What are the numbers?
Well, in neotropic, so in tropical environments, about 20% of the moths that are alive and living in those environments have not been described. So we call them dark diversity. I was floored when we went to Barrow, Colorado Island at the Smithsonian and tested the systems that over the 4 nights we were there initially, a quarter of the moths that we had seen were undescribed on a research station that's been studying insects and other things, plants and trees obviously as well, for almost 100 years, that still a quarter of the moths were undescribed. So,
and in the overall, I think the figure is that an estimated 80% of insects are undescribed. So there's an additional 5 million insect species that nobody's found.
So I remember coming back from there, and the reason why we're studying moths because they're the most well-known group that where we can train classifiers and leverage all the information that's available online. And I remember coming back home and saying, this can't be. There are no taxonomists. We will not be able to solve this problem with the current approach and traditional approaches. And then just having conversations with David and saying, how do we solve this? How do we bring in something that can accelerate and bring it to scale? Right.
So what these pictures are is some of those new species from going down and testing systems at Barrow, Colorado Island in Panama. And so these are species which they have a little score at the bottom, and that score indicates the dissimilarity in DNA. And the threshold, as I understand it, for dissimilarity being probably a new species in Lepidoptera in moths is 1.5%.
1.5 to 2.
So these are not just new species, they're very far away from existing species. And this is some of 300 that we found at that in a week, 300 new species. And this really motivated work, which is led by Etienne, who I think is sitting in the back there. So you can talk to Etienne about this in more detail if you want to wave. Hey, Etienne. You're behind a pillar from me, so I can't actually see you. But we thought that actually there's the possibility of using machine learning to find some of these new species. And so we now have, thanks to Etienne, algorithms that can not just classify moths, but can also say, this one might be new. Because how do you deal with that otherwise? Because there's no data for these. Literally no data in the world. So this is out of distribution detection, open set recognition techniques that are able to say this one might be new. And then working on the next set of tools, which can actually say, well, this might be a collection of photos that is a new species, and helping taxonomists describe that. So that's been one set of interesting research directions, as well as obviously deployment directions. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, so rapidly, so before we get into the Q&A, just to put this in perspective, the curator of the Insectarium, who worked 34 years at the Insectarium, who has been describing species with experts around the world for 50 years, and like as a monumental contribution, has described about 100 species of insects. And in that week, there were 300 new moths that were still undescribed in one single place in Panama, in high season of diversity. So challenges, from a human perspective, we'll definitely need this approach from an ML perspective.
And be nice to Max. You might get a species named after you. Other questions? I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Free-form chat.
Oh no.
Thank you for the discussion. I had a question that was more about what are the challenges and what solutions have you found to keep these really useful platforms alive as researchers that offer a service to the scientific community, and what advice could you give to people who would like to do that kind of stuff?
Unfair question. No, we are going through challenges for this, because obviously building such platforms requires extremely skilled and diverse people working on it, and we are exactly there, right? There are governmental options to apply for funding through, alliance projects, which is something we're exploring, but we'll be exploring all potential options.
Fundamentally, if you are a stakeholder that wants to do an assessment of an area of land, you need a lot of different pieces to that, and traditionally you need people to go out into the field and collect a lot of data. And this has the opportunity to do that at massively lower cost and greater scale. So there's huge use cases in assessment from an agricultural perspective, from a forestry perspective, from a development perspective, like understanding the quote-unquote value of a piece of land from an ecosystemic perspective, and really connecting the dots with those partners is something that we're working on now. So please reach out to us. We're at the point where the software is legitimately really useful. So this is a great point to work with us on scoping that for your particular use case, because we think that this could deliver some significant value to a lot of different sectors.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we see the upsides, we see the value for all kinds of stakeholders. Example for what David mentioned, but in agricultural settings and forestry settings and detection of alien invasive species, we're testing those with, we will be testing them in the ports of Montreal this summer for detection of alien invasives and monitoring overall of what's present in these areas, but it's connecting the dots and then, I guess, federating those relationships so that the platform becomes, it reaches the potential that it has. Yes?
Hi. I'm thinking back of what you said about studying moths in particular because of the abundance of data that you have, and I can't help but draw a parallel to animal vocalization detection, where citizen science data for birds are super useful to build models. And then what we find in that setting is that it is also really helpful to transfer to new species, starting from a model that was trained on just bird vocalizations. So I was wondering if this is a phenomenon that you're also observing for insect detection.
So you're suggesting that once one's trained on a subset of species, it's possible to transfer to others? Sure. I guess backing up a little bit, we're training on citizen science data. This is citizen science data and museum collections. Actually, that's one of the fundamental principles of our work. We want to make sure that it is able to be used by people with different kinds of camera systems, by people with different kinds of settings, installation parameters, etc. And so it's actually zero-shot transfer learning from GBIF indexed data, which is a mixture of citizen science data from iNaturalist and other platforms, and museum data. So it is already leveraging massively scalable data sources. The challenge of transferring to new species, I mean, yes, but you still need some data if you're going to make a label, fundamentally. You don't necessarily need that much, and we've done some sort of studies on how much data you need in certain cases. So I think with insects, there is the challenge that many species, including ones that are relatively common, surprisingly, actually have very little labeled data. And so you're always going to need some if you want to actually match up with existing labels. But this is where our category discovery algorithms come in, so that we can come up with guesses as to what a category is, even if there's truly no data associated with it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Fish Dale from UN Habitat. I have a question. I'm from an urban background, so I was wondering if you're using the data also to sort of protect biodiversity hotspots from development, if you're thinking about linking that information that you're creating to sort of urban planning processes.
Ultimately, yes. I mean, the data that we're collecting and that we will collect, the initial recommendation is it's open source and open access, right? So that it becomes accessible. The challenges that we're facing move faster than our capacity to gather data and have decision-making information for it. And, to build up on David's answer initially about stakeholders, I think this is what we want. We want to offer an easy solution to stakeholders in urban settings, in places where there are biodiversity hotspots, that can gather the information at scale and rapidly so that they can leverage this information. And sometimes, I mean, I've seen it with community science projects like for our program Mission Monarch. The reason why citizens were able to, go on to challenge the decision from the airport to destroy that habitat was that they had evidence from a community science database that monarchs were breeding in quantity in this area, and other birds as well that were nesting and stuff. So it allows, it can contribute to protecting the environment, but also down the road also probably designing urban spaces in better ways.
I think Professor Kate Jones at UCL is already doing this in London in micro green spaces in the city and on rooftops. I'm not aware that there's a project specifically focused on this kind of impact in Quebec yet. If you want to start that, please do.
Okay.
We have something in the making.
I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, 2 questions. Okay.
Hi. I was wondering from the image, so when you classify an image as potentially a new species, to doing a DNA test to actually classify that.
Yeah, so this is the protocol that we've put together is this initial expedition, and the results that you were seeing about the divergence, those specimens were photographed, then collected, and then barcoded afterwards to ensure that we had a legitimate confirmation that the species was novel. So then after that, once you have this information, and then I don't want to get into David's field, you can withdraw this information from the classifier and see how well it actually is able to detect it, knowing that it is a novel entity.
Okay.
Does that mean? Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. I was curious about the techniques you have to collect data. So you have citizens with their phones, and you go research people on the field with white screens and camera. And
so the process of gathering the citizen science data and the museum data is not done by us. Fortunately, there are massively scaled platforms that already exist for this. Moths exist in a sweet spot where there is a surprisingly large amount of data, but there are enormous gaps in what we understand. Like if you look at birds, we have like sort of good distribution models for birds. We at least know what most of the bird species are. With moths, we have a vast amount of gaps in every possible way, but there is enough data that you can actually use citizen science data and museum collections in a meaningful way to make a difference.
Yeah. A lot of the citizen science data is curated by experts, as it's submitted, though the labeling and the validation of the quality of the identifications is already fairly well done. And it gets a little more complicated for community science data that comes from the tropics, in good part because there's even fewer experts and fewer information. And currently there are classifiers on these community science projects that categorize and gather all this information, but the classifiers have a hard time performing decently for tropical environments at really large scales because the training sets are smaller and are not as well labeled as well. But overall, like David is mentioning, we don't have to, we were able to access this through GBIF, but it's been curated before it makes it to GBIF.
But on the ground, really, you have a white screen.
Yes.
And you take.
Oh yeah. So
on hers, like on
the common procedure is the one that we were showing is people with cameras, with their phones, photographing these individuals one by one. I went on a weird vacation 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that only people like me would go to with my dad, and this is what I did. I photographed moths in the high mountains of Panama for 8 days, and I submitted each and every single photograph to iNaturalist to bulk up the database over there, and that was my definition of a vacation, but I submitted like 4,000 images in 8 days. Yeah. So people like me do this around the world, and this is how we were able to benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation, a wonderful conversation. I love when you can tell when coworkers like each other. You guys have excellent rapport. Thank you both for being here and for your excellent